Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Revolution Recap. After struggling to find the net with 6 goals through their first 9 games, the Revs finally had an outburst, scoring 4 times and holding two 2-goal leads in the game against Kansas City. But, however, shaky defense, a branded by red card, and a questionable penalty call all led to the Revs blowing that lead and only taking away 1 point on the road in a crazy 4-4 draw against Sporting Kansas City. I'm Greg Johnstone. Joining me, as always, is Sean Donahue. Sean, how's it going?
Man, that game was not short for entertainment value, that's for sure. I don't know if it was very good soccer that we watched, but for one of the few times this season, I actually left the Revolution match having enjoyed watching it.
Yeah, I think that they were just saving all of the excitement for this one particular game, because there's certainly been not a whole lot. We've certainly had not a whole lot of energy and scoring chances in these games. They've really been kind of sluggish, physical 0-0 battles, or 1-0 battles, or 3-0 battles when it all unwinds in the final minutes, as we had Wednesday. But yesterday, certainly probably one of the better games from a neutral standpoint in a long, long time. I know that there was something that we retweeted earlier today. I think OptaJack had that game as having 6.97 expected goals, and that's the third highest in MLS since 2013. I'm going off of memory, so the numbers might be a little bit off there, but that just kind of goes to show how crazy this game was and how many scoring chances there were. Unfortunately for the Revolution, the majority of the scoring chances came from Sporting Kansas City, but the Revolution made good on their chances, especially early in the game, which is something that they haven't been doing lately. And they certainly delivered, and we saw some players get their first MLS goals in their careers. So a lot to take away from this game. Sean, what was your key takeaway?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways I could go with this one between positive and negative options. But I'll go with something positive, and that's that Juan Caicedo actually isn't a bad player. What he did in this game was phenomenal. His 2 finishes weren't. I mean, his second finish wasn't the most difficult. His first one was a good job to show that when he had time and space, he could do that spin move and finish. And then he played a key role in the third goal as well. The one that he didn't finish, where he kind of started that play with a quick pass to DeJuan Jones. At the same time, he probably should have gotten ahead on that ball if he had read it a bit better and actually finished it himself. But he did a good job setting up that play as well. So we had been down on Caicedo from what we saw in his first several games, but this was a very positive performance from him going forward. Again, he found a lot of space with Kansas City's defense, and had time on both of those goals that he finished. The first one maybe a little bit less so, but still had the time to turn before anyone got on him. But this was a positive sign for him, and now that he's found the back of the net, and twice in this one game, I'm sure his confidence is much higher, and I expect to see him play a lot more going forward. And his strike partner Juan Agudelo too, I thought had his best game of the season. With that goal, and also with being involved in the setup for the first goal, and heavily involved in their attack throughout. So for as negative as we've been on both of those 2 guys this season, both of them really showed up big in this game. And Agudelo was actually the Revs leader in touches with 43. And if you asked me the last time we saw a Revolution striker, and albeit later in the game we moved back a bit, but the last time we saw a Revolution striker lead the team in touches, I couldn't tell you. I don't remember that ever happening when I looked at one of these stats after the game.
Yeah, there's a bunch of weird stats that I'm sure we're going to get into. I was telling you before that Cody Cropper was the team leader in passes attempted. So the Revolution did not have a whole lot of the ball, and that leads to a lot of crazy stats. Another one that I liked was if you look at total crosses between the teams, Sporting Kansas City had 32 and the Revolution had 3. That's quite the disparity there. And then completed passes, 450 for Sporting Kansas City, 107 for the Revolution. So certainly, a lot of weird stats you can take from this, and the Juan Agudelo leading in touches, you can add to that. But for what it's worth, I do think he deserves a lot of credit for that game. He was all over the place. He won a couple of balls in the midfield. He certainly added a lot to the attack, had that nice little punch in. And I will give Caicedo too his due. Certainly the over-under 5 goal line. If you have the under 5 goals, you're kind of sweating bullets a little bit right now, because he's 40% of the way after last night. We talked last week too about, he's a player that the fewer touches he has, the better. Looks like he has really, really good instincts. And you don't want him dribbling with the ball. You don't really want him to be this player that, holds up the ball and is carrying the ball into the box, you want Service to be there for him. And I certainly think that you saw that 1-2 pass that you mentioned that set up that third goal was a great pass and great teamwork there with Buchanan. I also thought his second goal there was just a brilliant touch into the goal. So yeah, we saw what he can do, and I think he's earned himself some minutes going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think both of those two have earned themselves more minutes for, as disappointing as we talk about all the time this season about the lack of Revolution strikers getting shots on goal, and they had one shot on goal going into this one. It was the terrible Teal Bunbury header that was right at the keeper on a great chance. But they sure turned things around in this game with Agudelo having 3 shots on target and Caicedo having 2, and both of those being goals. And there's plenty of positives for the offense in this game, and it really looked like an offensive performance that matched more of what we saw last year at the beginning of the season when the Revolution were doing well, just hitting on those quick counterattacks that we hadn't seen much this year, but saw a lot of last year at the beginning of the season when the Revolution were actually playing well. So that's a positive to see them find a way to kind of get their offense going again in that way. And this game was kind of designed for it, knowing that Kansas City's a team that's going to hold possession, and the Revolution are going to have to hit on the counterattack, and they played that well.
And this was a very glass half full, glass half empty game. So I'll kind of take the glass half empty takeaway, which is that back line of Brandon Bye, Andrew Farrell, Jalil Anibaba, and Edgar Castillo is more or less of a disaster. We saw this lineup against Atlanta, and they only conceded twice, but there were a number of chances. They conceded 4 times in this game, and there were still a number of huge chances for Kansas City. It's almost miraculous that they kept them at 4 goals. The one big chance that I remember that strikes me that should have been a goal was Andrew Farrell. I think it was about the 20th minute, turns the ball over in their own third. There's kind of a quick pass into the center to a wide open Christian Nemeth, and he misses his shot near post, probably from about 10 to 12 yards out. Jalil Anibaba flat out left his marker, Nemeth, to go get the guy with the ball before realizing that he probably shouldn't do that. But by that time, it was too late, and Nemeth had a wide open shot. There were a number of other headers and shots that just missed for Kansas City. Their finishing was not amazing throughout the night, even though there were 4 goals. Christian Nemeth ended with a brace, but he had 7 shots total. 3 of them were on target. I'm sure there were a couple headers he wished back, and of course that 20th minute shot. So that defense conceded 4 times, and I feel like it could have been 6 or 7 times. That's the second time we've seen this lineup, and even if Mancien and De La Mayo were unavailable due to injuries, which we will take the Revs for their word at that, even though that was not in the injury report or reported before lineups came out, I think it shows the failure of the Revolution organization to build depth along that back line. So yeah, really disappointing kind of results, and I think it cost them 2 points yesterday.
Yeah, and if you want to bring up the injuries, look at who Kansas City was missing: Matt Beasley, Roger Espinoza, Jimmy Medranda, Rodney Wallace, Jalen Lindsay, Eric Hurtado, Illy Sanchez. They had no shortage of injuries too. I think the Sporting Kansas City certainly wins the battle of who had more injuries going into this one. The Revolution had a relatively empty injury report, but those 2 guys were obviously being out, hurt them. But again, it just shows that a couple injuries and this defense is automatically decimated. It was a bit shocking to see how bad they were. But the problems that you saw with this back line, I constantly kept seeing were times when Farrell and Anibaba would let Nemeth or whoever was the guy up there up top get in between the 2 of them, and it was 2 defenders on 1 striker, but nobody would close them down and would just leave them open. We've seen that from Mancien as well when he's out there, so I don't think it's necessarily just an Anibaba-Farrell problem. It's just something we constantly keep seeing, and the Revolution paid for it in this game, and they could have paid for it by even more than 4 goals if Kansas City's finishing was better on a couple of chances.
Yep, absolutely. So, Sean, we've already talked about Juan Agudelo and Caicedo too, who I think we're going to, at least I owe them both an apology. I feel like we've been kind of very critical of those 2 throughout the beginning parts of the season, although it's hard not to be critical of the forwards when they can't get a shot on target. But both of them coming through yesterday, both of them converting chances. There is another player, too, that I think Revolution fans are his stock is skyrocketing, and that's Tayon Buchanan, the rookie out of Syracuse. He had 2 assists yesterday, both passes, wonderful service into the box. Sean, why don't you give us your assessment of the rookie's night yesterday?
Well, first of all, the funny thing to me is I believe it was after the match, Brad Friedel said the plan was to start Brandon Bye at right midfield until those injuries happened at the center backs, and he's going to start De La Mea. But I guess De La Mea, from what we heard, had concussion-like symptoms or something along those lines that kept him out. So Buchanan presumably probably wasn't even going to start this game, but for a fluke injury to De La Mea at the last minute that saw him inserted into the lineup, and boy did he show what he could do in this one with his pace and his touch, and just an eye for goal. So I thought I was really impressed with what we saw from him, with being involved in all three of all of the first three goals the Revolution had. I thought it was a really good performance by by Tajon Buchanan, and I thought he also was actually involved in the final goal too that Juwan Jones scored by sending a cross into the box that led to that to eventually lead to that handball. So very positives from Tajon Buchanan, and then a bit of naivety where he gave up that penalty kick. It was a soft penalty, but he put his arm around in front of the guy, and that led to the penalty that Kansas City had. So you saw a lot of positives from Buchanan, and then you saw a little bit of naivety from a guy that is still only 20 years old and has some learning to do.
The other thing too is that, and because the Revolution didn't have a lot of possession, because they, didn't hold the ball a lot, didn't pass the ball around a lot. We kind of have limited stats on Tajon Buchanan. And Sean, you noted before we started recording that he was 5 for 7 passing. And I think if you asked, the average person, how many passes did he have, you'd assume he'd at least get to double digits, because you can just remember off the top of your head 3 or 4 of them that were successful. But he was 5 for 7 passing. He had only 21 touches. So we really, on the whole, have not learned a ton about Buchanan, but we have seen the flashes in his potential that a lot of fans are excited about. And, I do think that he's probably earned himself a couple minutes going forward. Obviously 2 assists. When your team has trouble creating chances, creating 2 assists like he did last night certainly is a major, major positive. So, I was very impressed with what he could do. I think the more and more we see him and DeJuan Jones, who we'll talk about in a minute, I think the more and more we see them, the more and more comfortable they are. I think the first few performances we saw, their pass accuracy was a little bit off. They didn't seem to know what to do with the ball. You can see that every time they come into the game or make an appearance, they're doing a little bit better every single time. And in Buchanan's case yesterday, he did a lot better. And really, we can credit that 1 point to him for that great service to Caicedo. But as I mentioned, Sean, I want to get your thoughts on DeJuan Jones too, because he had a bit of a quiet night too. But he assisted the first goal, I believe. I don't have my notes in front of me. I'm pretty sure he got. Yeah,
it was Agudelo that set up the first goal, but he was involved.
Yeah, no. He recovered the ball at midfield, passed it to Caldwell, and then Caldwell up to Agudelo. Sorry. He actually had a minute before that. Here's where I'm getting confused. A minute before, Juan Agudelo missed a shot, and Jones set him up on the service. So I'm misreading my notes. But DeJuan Jones had a nice pass right before the goal. He had a couple of great moments and a couple of really, really nice runs as well. So, Sean, what was your thought on DeJuan Jones?
Yeah, you mentioned it. This was a game where both Jones and Buchanan really shined, and I think it was kind of set up, for their styles of play. I mentioned last week that I thought the Revolution would kind of go with the all hustle lineup, and that certainly includes DeJuan Jones, the fastest guy on the team, and Buchanan, who's almost as fast as DeJuan Jones. And those two players in a game like this, where the Revolution were relying on quick counterattacks, didn't have much possession. Speed kills, and you saw that from both of them. And on top of speed killing, they also need to have a good end product, and Buchanan certainly did in his crosses. And DeJuan Jones finished that playoff. I'm still not sure DeJuan Jones is necessarily the most comfortable guy on the left flank playing that role. But for this game, he was great and used his pace to get up and down that wing, and that's exactly what the Revolution needed in this one. And him and Buchanan were good complementary players for as little as they actually solved the ball, making the most of it when the Revolution had those quick counterattacks.
Absolutely. And kind of moving towards the back line, we've covered the glass half full. Now let's get to the glass half empty. I think one major point we got to talk about is Brandon Bye's performance. Obviously, it's going to be marred a lot by that red card he got in the 55th minute, putting the Revolution down a man, which was kind of where it started all unwinding for the Revolution. Sean, what were your thoughts on Brandon Bye's performance?
Yeah, I didn't think he was having a very good game to begin with. But, I go and look at that play, and I wonder what the Revolution are doing up, 3-1 and getting that stretched. And I know, it's all about the press. It's all about the press. nonstop pressing. In a game like this for the Revolution, that's what Brad Friedel wants to do, playing that high line. But it's crazy to me that you get stuck in that position where the Revolution have a turnover and, Brandon Bye is one-on-one defending near midfield because he's the only guy that's in the Revolution half of the field. So yeah, the tackle was dumb. And I think in that situation when you're up by 2 goals and it's the 55th minute, you're better off, risking conceding a goal and tracking this guy down and trying to do as much as you can to disrupt him without fouling, than putting your team down a man like he did there. So I think that goes to him being a young guy and just in his second season and not being the smartest play. But I didn't think he had a very good game overall. I thought that, Kansas City had a lot of joy down that left flank attacking him, before that happened. So it was, not a great performance from him. And, maybe he was impacted too by what it sounded like the plan was to play him at right midfield, up until whenever that De La Mea injury that we didn't find out about until after the game occurred.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I think as time goes on, we realize Brandon Bye is not really a right back. He's more of a right midfielder or a right winger. And we got a performance that we kind of expected. And I'm glad you hit upon the point that, the Revolution backline kind of left him all up there. Edgar Castillo, the play started in Kansas City zone on a throw-in. Looks like Edgar Castillo is pushing up, but it also looks like Andy Baba is pushing up a lot further than he should be as well.
We've seen this before. Like I forget which game it was, but it wasn't that long ago. We were talking about the same type of situation where they pushed Andy Baba way up on a throw-in in Kansas City's defensive third, and then they get burned.
Well, and another thing too is, this isn't a 0-0 game at home where you're trying to press and keep the opponent, stuck in their zone. You're up 3-1 in the 55th minute. It feels like the only thing you have to worry about is getting beat long. I mean, to me, that seems to be the last thing you want to happen. You want to keep your back line back. And, I don't know. I cannot imagine why Brandon Bye was left back there all alone, especially on a yellow. Even if he doesn't make a tackle like that, as clear and obvious as it would have been. But if there's any sort of foul one-on-one, he's getting a yellow and he's being sent off. So it was a bit interesting how that kind of all broke down. And, it wasn't a smart play by Brandon Bye, but I don't think it was smart by anyone involved. I'm going to say that. In terms of Brandon Bye's performance, before that, he had 3 interceptions. He was 5 for 11 passing. And, again, you can't really take the stats too seriously because this is a game where the Revolution were not concerned about, keeping possession. I think their total pass accuracy of the night was 57%, and Kansas City was 83. So obviously the stats are a little messy, but when you consider that all 5 of the 11 passes were short passes, none of them were considered long by Stat Zone. A lot of them also in the Revolution half. It really wasn't a great performance by Brandon Bye all the way around. And you have to assume some of that is that he was expected to play midfield. He might not have been fully prepared to take over that right back job, but overall, yeah, I think he was the weak link in that back line last night.
Yeah, well, one of several weak links in that back line, but perhaps the one that stood out the most. But he also was just possessed twice, had 2 unsuccessful touches, was a bit of a turnover machine, which, again, when you're playing the way Brad Friedel wants his team to play with that high line and pressing, you leave your team exposed when you turn the ball over in the areas that he was turning it over in.
Let's talk about another, I'll say, weak spot in the back line. I'm sure you have some thoughts on that, Sean, but more importantly, another guy we won't see next week as he was also red carded, Jalil Anibaba. Sean, what were your thoughts on Anibaba's performance?
I thought he regressed to the mean. There's a reason that Anibaba has, been a journeyman in this league and can't stick around in the team. And it's not that he's, a dominant center back. It's that he's a very solid center back and is a good, third option on your team. But he's been the Revolution's best center back this game. And I don't think that he's actually, the level that he should be to be a team's best center back. And this game, I thought he was really poor. There were several times where he lost his man. I think more than one of the goals could be blamed on him. Header the header that Namath had, I believe that he was marking Namath and didn't really jump or challenge him and left him with kind of an open header. One of the earlier goals where I think it was Namath as well was in the middle and kind of split Farrell and Anibaba. Neither of them decided to take ownership and go after Namath. This was, I thought, the worst performance from Anibaba this season, and irregardless of that red card that he got, which was also terrible. Although again, it's another one I kind of hesitate with because the Revolution were stretched. This one was late in the game, and if they had conceded a goal there while they were down a man in the game, we'd pretty much be over. So in some cases, I can see Anibaba's a bit more than Bye as taking one for a team in a situational sense. But even before that, I thought this was the worst game we've seen of Anibaba this season. And even if they hadn't gotten that red card, we might have seen him benched next week, assuming Mancienne and De La Mea come back, because if they don't, the Revolution are in big trouble.
Yeah, and I will say too, the one thing I think Mancienne brings is he's able to provide a lot of. He takes leadership on headed clearances, and I think Annie Baba and Farrell. I'm sure the Kansas City, the second they saw the lineup, they knew they were going to be crossing the ball all night. Andy Baba 7 for 15 passing. He only had one block. Normally he's good for 3 or 4 and a couple of fist pumps. 2 interceptions and 2 headed clearances. When you combine that to Andrew Farrell, who had 3 interceptions, 8 clearances, 4 of them headed. Andy Baba didn't seem to be very involved defensively, and there were a ton of chances to do that. So, and as you say, there were a couple of mishaps where he didn't seem to be, he seemed to be a step behind. So yeah, regress to the mean. Might be harsh but fair. And we saw this last season where he started over De La Mea for a couple of months, and then eventually De La Mea earned his spot back into the lineup. So yeah, next week, if De La Mea and Mancienne are back, you have to assume that they are in the lineup, and you have to assume that if those two do very, very well, Andy Baba might have played himself out of a lineup spot. So we'll see what the lineup is, I guess, really in 2 weeks to see where Andy Baba stands. But
if those two aren't back, what the heck do you do?
That's one of our Twitter questions. Do you want to tackle that one now?
Yeah, let's jump into that.
Well, so one thing that was interesting to me too is that they subbed on Brian Wright at the end, and they had Wilfred Zahibo. My assumption would be that Wilfred Zahibo is going to play center back if Andy Baba, De La Mea, and Mancienne are all not available. If one of them is available, I guess you could pair them with Andrew Farrell. That would be my assumption to what happens. And then right back, I guess it's Luis Caicedo.
Yeah, but by default, because we all know Gabriel Somi's not going to see the field.
Correct. And I mean, maybe because there are so many people with red cards, maybe they do move Somi up to the 18 and only play him in the case of emergency, where you could put, Edgar Castillo to right back or something to that effect. But that would be my assumption to what happens. Now, if all 3 of them are gone, if Mancienne, Andy Baba, and De La Mea are all unavailable, which I can't see happening considering how these injuries kind of seem to pop up at the last second. None of them seem super serious. I would assume Zahibo is playing center back. I don't know what else you could do. Who else do you trust back there?
I think you go out and loan somebody at that point.
Oh,
any option's better than Zahibo, I would say. I think if you have Zahibo, you might as well just forfeit the match. Him playing center back sounds like about the worst idea you could possibly have, and I agree with you that might be the only option.
Yeah, I mean they'll have to bring back Trialist to put in the cheap. I mean, if that is an option, I'd be all for it, but I don't know who they would loan because they don't have a USL affiliate, so it's a bit of a sticky situation. I'm not sure who you could bring in to throw into a lineup on a 1 week loan. And then that also doesn't solve the problem either way of, if one of them goes down, who's taking over at center back. My assumption is that Zahibo was the emergency center back yesterday, looking at the subs that were available. There were no defensive subs there. So my assumption was that Caicedo was the backup left and right back and Zahibo was the backup center back.
Yikes.
Let's go into kind of a goalkeeper discussion before we talk about what we thought of the lineup. Well, although we've kind of already revealed our hands of what we thought of the lineup. Cody Cropper concedes another 4 goals. That makes about 7 goals in the last 120 minutes or so. Tacking on the 3 goals he conceded in Montreal. Sean, what was your thoughts on Cody Cropper's performance yesterday?
I mean, I didn't think he was particularly good, but I also don't know that I can blame him too much on any of the goals. The one they had the best chance of saving was actually the penalty kick that was right down the middle. So yeah, I mean, Cody Cropper made a big error last week. I don't think there was anything in this game that was completely terrible that you can blame him for. Never good when a goalkeeper lets in 4 goals, and his distribution this game was not up to par from what we've seen in some of the other games. But really, I don't know how you can put too much blame for him, given how this game played out, and given that he was down 2 men for part of it.
Yeah, and I will say he did have that great save where he kind of tipped the ball and it was rolling along the goal line, and I think it was Gerso jumps into the ball, and Cropper basically with both hands is able to just keep it out. So he did have a spectacular save yesterday to keep one off the board. But overall, I thought he looked a little uncomfortable on some plays. If you go back and you just look at the goals, I didn't really notice this until I saw a highlight package this morning. But if you go back and you look at the goals, it looks like on every single one he just jumps up in the air, kind of like he's doing like a jumping jack. And I've never seen him do that before. So I don't know if, he's got some bad memories of Montreal where, there was a ball that was kind of slightly above his kind of catch range. They tipped up in the air and it went in. Now he has to kind of leave his feet and jump a little bit. I don't know. He looked a little uncomfortable on all those goals. Not the penalty kick, but the ones from the run of play. I think on all three, he kind of jumps up a little bit and then he has to kind of jolt to the side, and it looks very, very uncomfortable. So I think on paper, obviously 4 goals conceded, he's going to, it's not going to look good for him. But he did have some moments yesterday. Sean, what are we thinking in terms of who's starting in Philadelphia?
I think it's a toss-up. I think with a full week between games, there's a chance that they do switch to Matt Turner. But if I was guessing, I would say Cody Cropper, but I'm not at all confident. So I wouldn't be surprised either way.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you there too. I'm going to lean Cropper. I think that I think it says a lot that Friedel stuck with Cropper. Normally, after a goalkeeper makes a mistake like he did against Montreal, we see a switch, and we didn't. So I think he has a lot of trust in Cropper, and I think too you can't blame Cropper really for any of those goals that went in. A lot were kind of reaction saves, and as you say, he got a hand on the penalty kick. That was probably the best one that he could have saved. So yeah, overall, I think we'll see Cropper again. I don't know how much more of a leash he has. I think if Philadelphia scores 3-4, I think then we might see Matt Turner in the future, but we'll find out. Sean, what was your thoughts on the lineup? Obviously, a lot of switching after the catastrophe against Montreal. Luis Caicedo, Diego, and Bunbury all relegated to the bench. Mancien and De La Mea moved out of the 18, both apparently because of injury. And then into the lineup, Tajon Buchanan, DeJuan Jones, who we've already talked about. DeJuan Jones is not even in the 18 for the last 2 games, hopping back into the lineup and playing pretty well. And then, of course, JFC's debut and Brandon Bye. Any reactions in terms of the lineup and anything you would have done differently?
Yeah, to be honest, it's about what I would have expected had you told me that De La Mea and Mancien were out. I kind of figured that this is what we're going to see with, like I mentioned last week, the speedy wingers out there, the young guys, and playing kind of a different shape than what we saw the past 2 games, and that was the case here. What I would have thought if there wasn't for all the injuries, I thought Castillo might get a rest since he's just coming off of an injury. He's 32 years old and had played 90 minutes Wednesday and Saturday. It seems like he would have been a candidate for a rest, but no, obviously he didn't get a rest. Agudelo, if you've listened to the Far Post podcast, they were talking about how gassed he looked after Wednesay's game. So I thought he might be a guy that would get a rest, and he certainly didn't look gassed in this game. So makes sense they didn't rest him, and he performed a lot better than I had expected based on his recent performances. So that makes sense. But given the injuries, the only thing that maybe surprised me a little bit is that Luis Caicedo didn't find his way into the lineup.
Yeah, that was probably, outside of Mancien, that was probably the biggest head scratcher for me. I would have thought that they would have found a spot for Luis Caicedo, even if it was for Scott Caldwell. Not to say that Caldwell had a poor game. He actually had a very, very nice pass to Agudelo, as we said. But I guess Caldwell is the captain when Mancien is out. But Luis Caicedo had been playing very, very well, in my opinion, the past couple of games. My assumption is that he was just the backup left/right back. That is my guess to why he was moved to the bench, and they kind of expected him to go in at some point. But that was a bit of a head scratcher too. The other thing too that I'm surprised about is that Brandon Bye was originally supposed to start at right midfield. He moved to right back when De La Mea was hurt. But Teal Bunbury did not get the start at right midfield, which I would have thought he would have gotten the start over Buchanan. So I thought that was a bit of an interesting twist that Buchanan and Brandon Bye were above Teal Bunbury in terms of the depth chart for right midfield. I'm not sure. We have seen him there play a couple times, kind of mixed results throughout the season. So he did end up coming into the game, I believe, for Tajon Buchanan anyway. Maybe that was just a rest factor, but I thought that was pretty interesting, and I don't know if that speaks to that's due to Bunbury's recent poor form in terms of shot accuracy. The one other thing I will say too is that I thought it was interesting Brian Wright came on when you had Christian Penilla and Diego Fagundes on the bench. It was tied at that point. I guess they wanted their best striker on the field at that time, but I don't know. I thought that was a bit interesting, all things considered. That, and maybe again, it's because they played 3 games in 8 days. But those were kind of the 3 interesting moves that kind of had me scratching my head, and I'm probably reading way too much into.
No, and as far as Bunbury goes, he'd only played 60 minutes each of the last two games. He came out, around the 60-minute mark, so he should have been rested if that was, or at least fit enough to start this game if that was the issue. I think it was a matter of his finishing's been really poor lately. His confidence seems down. Bring somebody else in, and I get that. As far as the Brian Wright sub. I imagine they wouldn't have made that sub had they known Andy Bobble was going to get ejected immediately afterwards. But more importantly, it was interesting to me that they did that, and then they put Juan Agudelo, who again we talked about how people talked about on the Far Post podcast that he looked gassed after the last game. In the 88th minute, you're subbing him Brian Wright for DeJuan Jones and putting Agudelo as kind of your left midfielder and asking him to track back in the game where he's been really active. That was the real interesting decision. The real interesting part of that decision to me that was the move they went to stick Brian right up top. I kind of get that, get some fresh legs out there, but you're moving Juan Agudelo to a pretty difficult spot to cover when the team is down a man at that point. So it shows a lot of faith in him. Looking at the bench, I don't really know what your other option would have been. I think both Pania and Fagundes can be defensive liabilities, but it was interesting to see that, and again speaks. Talking about like Wilfred Zahibo speaks to how little confidence there is in him that you wouldn't have tried to bring him on to try to lock down the game in the center of the field.
Yeah, and before we move on to Twitter questions too, I also want to kind of express my frustration that Brian Wright gets called in, and we've really only seen him come on, a few minutes here, a few minutes there. I feel like at this point I'd rather him just stay down at Birmingham, where he's actually getting minutes in and impressing for Jay Heaps, but I don't know. Hopefully we get a start from him eventually. I thought it would have been one of these last three games, but strikers were rotated without him getting any significant minutes. So hopefully we get to see some Brian Wright in the future. Sean, you ready for some Twitter questions?
Let's jump into it.
Randy asked us, did Mancienne not even being in the 18 help us, hurt us, or not make a difference?
Defensively, it probably hurt them a little bit. But because I'm assuming Buchanan wasn't going to start if Mancienne had played, it helped him out. That change forced Buchanan onto the field because Buchanan was one of the offensive MVPs in this one. So for that reason alone, for the unintentional forcing Buchanan onto the field, I think it helped the Revolution because I'm not sure that Bai would have had as much success as Buchanan did.
Yeah, I will say if Mancienne was available in the 18, I think it would have certainly helped where, when Brandon Bai went out, you could put him into the game, move Farrell over to right back. And I think Mancienne would have been able to give you a little bit of cover on headers and crosses coming into the box. So I do think it hurt a little bit. I know Mancienne is not having the best season. But overall, I think he would have been a clear upgrade from the center backs in that back four that we saw last night. Cobb Braft asked us two questions. One is Juan Fernando Caicedo the real deal? Was he just missing the service he needed? And two, what are your thoughts on Tajon Buchanan? He looked amazing. We've already talked about Tajon Buchanan a little bit, so let's tackle the JFC question. Do you think he's the real deal, Sean?
My verdict is still out for me. This was a more promising game, but it was a nice move on that first goal. But again, he had a lot more time than you would expect someone to usually have in that situation. He made some good runs. He had some nice passes. This was a very positive game going forward for him, but it was also a very weird and unique game, as we discussed earlier. So I would say in my mind, the verdict is still out. And, worth mentioning that the center back that he was going against a lot, who was from Rwanda and whose name I will not be able to pronounce, so I'm going to skip that, was a 22-year-old that was making his first ever MLS start. So I think that probably helped him out a bit too, to be going against him and not against a guy like Matt Besler. We might have seen a different game if Matt Besler had been out there instead of a guy making his first MLS start. But a lot of positives from Juan Fernando Caicedo. I'm a lot more positive on what he can bring to this team now. I'm just curious to see him do it in a different situation because I do think the way this game played out was very unique.
Yeah, I took a lot of positives too away from his performance. As I said earlier, the fewer touches he has, the better. You want to just get him the service, and he's going to try to put it on frame. And we really haven't seen him. This was his first game where he got a shot on goal. So it's great to see his ability to finish. It's great to see his ability to get shots on target. So is he the real deal? I am leaning yes. I am leaning the over on 5 goals for Juan Fernando Caicedo. A total flip-flop from Wednesday. But I would say very positive. And in terms of Buchanan too, I still I'm a little more bearish on him. I still think he's a pretty raw player, but we did see the flashes that he has, and he created plays, and that's more than you can say about anyone else. So I think if you're one of these play the kids fans, DeJuan Jones and Tayon Buchanan certainly are making very, very strong case. Actually, we're going to lead right into the next question now that I'm saying this out loud. Mohammed Hussein asks us, do you think Jones and Tayon on the wings is something to grow on and continue to use in the coming games? And just to finish the point that I was talking about, they're creating chances, and I think that's a thing the Revolution have struggled with time and time again. They have another road game, so they might come out in a similar formation against Philadelphia. So I would expect to see both of them getting more minutes going forward. Although the last time I said that about DeJuan Jones, he was dropped out of the 18. But so yeah, overall, I'm going to say yes, and I say they start next game.
Yeah, I mean, it works in a game where the Revolution expect to be on the back foot, where they're going against a team that's going to hold a lot of possession and they're going to need to counterattack. Again, those two guys have a ton of pace, and that's something you can't teach. Even though I think they both are raw and have some growing to do, and certainly are very young, so there's plenty of time for that, and you'd expect that. When the Revolution play this type of game, they're perfect for it. When the Revolution go back home and they're playing against a weaker team that's going to bunker in, I'm not sure they're perfect for that situation. I don't know that they have the skill to beat a defense that's contained back there and isn't trying to press forward. That's maybe where you need a Pinilla or Diego Fagundez, and even though they haven't shown it this year, where those are guys that can create chances against defense like that. Again, that's been the Revolution's problem all year is creating chances against a defense like that. They've also had problems creating chances against a team like this that's pushing forward and trying to lead the initiative and attack. But yeah, I think this is something we're going to see a lot more of going forward when the Revolution are on the road and playing teams that are good in possession. And maybe we're not going to see it when the Revolution go back home and are playing teams where the Revolution would expect to be the aggressor and win that game on their own terms rather than countering.
Yeah, and you more or less have answered the next question. Zachary Grimes asks us, can the Revs live with being a team who is dominated possession-wise every match, but they're able to score and get results because of the way they press? Or will this just bring them bad form and results? And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there that, they're going to have to learn to play with possession at home, and they're going to have to learn how to, create possession when teams bunker down, because we've seen this at home where teams just kind of sit back and they wait for the Revolution to turn the ball over and then hit them on the fast break, which the Revs traditionally have been terrible at. I think they had been improving a little bit this season. But Sean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is a formula that's going to get the Revolution to the playoffs. I think it's an option that you use in the right situation and can work well. There are teams in MLS that have been successful kind of skirting possession and more focused on turnovers and counterattacking. The Red Bulls were very successful last year. Won the Supporters' Shield as a team that primarily played the high press and counterattacked and did very well at that. But they also were a team that found ways to score when that wasn't working, when there were teams that were bunkered in that they couldn't counterattack against. And this Revolution team just hasn't done that. So yeah, the press and the counterattacking style that the Revolution played can be your primary form and can be successful. Can be very successful when you're in the right situation, but there are going to be games where it doesn't work, and the Revolution don't seem to have the talent to find a way to win those games when the press and the counterattack isn't leading to chances.
Yeah, and not just that too. I mean, if you look at this game, this looks like a quote unquote positive result in the sense that if you had told me before the game that the Revolution are going to tie this game, I probably would have been very happy with it. So the result probably is quote unquote positive here, but you have to look at the margin of error here. The Revs had 10 shots. Kansas City had 19. The Revs had 7 of those 10 shots on target, and Kansas City had 6 for 19 on target. So it was kind of like flip-flop where, if you had told me the Revs had 7 of 10 shots on target, I never would have believed you. On a bad night, on a night that we can kind of expect from the Revolution, some of these shots miss a little bit. Some of these shots are, just a little bit in front or, over the bar or just wide of the post. So, in order to play this type of game that they played yesterday, they have to really capitalize on their chances, and they have to be accurate at shooting. And those are two things that I really don't think we've seen a lot of the Revolution. So even if they play this way on the road, it doesn't guarantee good results regardless. And not to mention, too, if they fall behind, if they were trailing Kansas City at any point in this game, Kansas City would have been sitting back and waiting for them to make a move. And it's just not a formula for success. So it's like in The Water Boy when the other team just figures they need to just kneel down because the only way that Adam Sandler's team is they just keep getting interceptions and running the ball back or keep forcing fumbles and they keep scoring off of turnovers. So they just decide to kneel the ball down and let, I don't remember the name of the college that they are playing at, but they essentially make their offense score points and they're like, we're screwed. Like that's literally the revolution.
Yeah, and this is, Kansas City is a great team, but this is not, Kansas City's best lineup that was out there by any stretch. And I think it's perfectly fair to point that out. Again, Beasler wasn't out there, and they're starting this 22-year-old who just came from the Rwanda Premier League that has only made one other previous appearance, and it was as a sub. Their left back in this game, and I don't know why Sinovic didn't start, but the left back in this game was a central midfielder by trade who they signed as a designated player that for some reason they put in a left back in this one. They had a 16-year-old in midfield, albeit one that's been very impressive, but still a very young guy. Out there. It was not the best lineup from Kansas City by any stretch. And Kansas City, since that letdown in the CONCACAF Champions League hasn't been playing at their best. So, yes, it's fantastic that the Revolution went to Kansas City results-wise and got a draw. But it's tough for me to there's a lot of positives to take away from this one, but it's tough for me to, look at this game and say the Revolution figured it out. That's for sure.
Yep. I won't lie. During the majority of your answer there, I was thinking back, trying to hope that I remembered I got that reference right. I haven't seen The Water Boy in years, so I apologize if I got any part of that wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's how that movie goes. I don't know. Sean, Barbara asked us, were the Revs Toledo'd or did they just fall apart? I'll also say she asked us our thoughts on Cropper and if we will see Tawan, Juan, and Daewon together. We've kind of answered those questions, but I just wanted to say that last question out loud. So, yeah, Sean, how much of an impact did the refereeing have?
I mean, I think they fell apart. I think the refereeing, I don't think the refereeing decisions were that terrible. I think Brandon Bye's red card was a red card, and like you said, he was already on a yellow card. I think the penalty kick that Buchanan gave up was soft, but also I've seen less called. That was a bit harsh, but at that point the Revolution were already down a man, and I think Kansas City was probably going to find a way to equalize this game one way or the other. The Revolution got a bit lucky on the penalty kick they earned. It was a penalty, but it was, Juan Aguadella was running away from goal and kicked the ball up, and it happened to hit a guy in the arm. It was the right call, but it was, a bit lucky there, and, that led to one of their goals. And, the Annie Baba red card, I don't think you can really have any complaints over. So, yeah, you might feel like that, that one penalty kick they were a little hard done by on, but I don't think it was the referee that cost the Revolution 3 points in this game. It was hard to blame this one on the ref. The Revolution, I think, collapsed. And what was the second half of the question?
It was were the Revs Toledo'd or did they just fall apart? And then she asked about Cropper and will we see? Are you just saying this so I have to say this out loud again? Will we see Tawan, Juan, and Daewon together?
I think
I'm going to call that the Taewon line.
I think we'll see them perhaps next week, but I don't think it's going to be the everyday lineup from the Revolution for the reasons that I said earlier.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree with you. And getting back to the refereeing, I think that you can make the penalty kick was very weak. I will say that. I thought that was a pretty terrible call overall. I know you said that Buchanan, needs to know better, but I really didn't think there was enough there to, make that penalty call. And the other thing too is I guess he waved it off as no penalty kick, and then he changed his mind in the heat of the moment. And I don't think they went to VAR, which I thought was kind of strange. So that call was overall very strange on the whole. But there wasn't a whole lot else that I can look back on that match and think that the referee was trying to get it. He was, I don't think he has a bad relationship with Brad Friedel like some VAR officials. And another thing too is that you could say that, what was more of a penalty or potentially a penalty if he was in the box was there was a foul on Kellen Rowe in the, I think, 8th minute where he makes his way around Carlos Gil, and Carlos Gil looks like kind of trips him from behind or makes a lot more contact than Buchanan did. And, Rowe goes down in the box. I'm sure that's why they didn't call it a foul because there, wasn't enough for a penalty. But, if the referee was kind of out for the Revolution and Brad Friedel, so to speak, I think that would have been a penalty. That was much more of a penalty than what we saw in the second half on the Buchanan foul. So
Friedel certainly wasn't happy with the refereeing based on his comments after the game. But
oh, was he? Oh, yeah, he said that ours was a penalty and theirs wasn't, right?
Yeah, and he said Toledo really needs to have a review of that game. Then he said something about how we reflect after the game, and the referee should too. But he did. But
James,
he didn't want to make excuses. He said so.
yes, yes. I don't want to make excuses, but if I did want to make excuses, it's the referee. James Downing asks us, Revs goals mainly came from SKC's defending. Has the offense figured it out, or was this more to do with SKC's terrible defending? And he points out, too, that Sinovic was sitting out for a midfielder. And he also points out that how about that over-under 5 goals for JFC, which I deserve that. I deserve that. I took my victory lap way too soon. But Sean, has the offense figured it out, or was it a bad night for Kansas City?
A little bit of both. It was a bad night for Kansas City. It was a game that played to the Revolution's strengths. But guys that were missing good chances scored in this game. So having Agudelo gain confidence, and I think he certainly did in this game. Having Juan Caicedo gain confidence, and he certainly did in this game, is a huge positive for the Revolution. But to say the Revolution offense has completely figured it out, I wouldn't go that far yet. Again, like I've been hitting it home, this is a very unique match that we saw, and I don't think many games are going to play out like this one did. So we'll see what happens next week, and we'll see what happens going forward. But it's undoubtedly a positive that two of your strikers that were really struggling for confidence picked up a lot of confidence in this game.
Yeah, I think too the biggest positive going forward is that Caicedo has kind of gotten over that hump, and Juan Agudelo also has gotten on the score sheet too. I think that's going to do wonders for them going forward. I think we just need Teal Bunbury to get one in, and then the goals will start pouring in. James Dunning also asks us, obligatory, where can the Revs get players like Nemeth and Rowe, Rowe and Sinovic? That road of Susie to Nemo goal was sweet. Sean, where can we get these guys?
It's always interesting to watch a player score against their former team and see how they react. And Nemeth was not holding back on his celebrations. Let's put it that way. I thought it was also a little bit awkward when Nemeth kind of hit his head when he walked behind Friedel during the halftime interview. But as we've talked about on this podcast before, Nemeth's a fantastic player. Brad Friedel couldn't find a way to make him work in the system. And like we've said, maybe they should have found a way to make the system work for Nemeth instead. But he's a phenomenal player, and I thought he had a really good game. Kellen Rowe still isn't having the best year for Kansas City. I'm sure he's happy to be on a better team than the Revolution, but he's been in and out of the lineup. He had a decent game in this one. But where can the Revolution find players like that? We find ourselves asking that question a lot. The Sinovic, which was many years ago that the Revolution cut Seth Sinovic and waived him. At the time when you could make the case he was the best left back on the Revolution roster, and how much the Revolution have struggled to find a left back since then. That remains to me the one of the most shocking decisions of Mike Burns' tenure to waive a young left back that was playing really well, and then pick up. I'm blanking on the guy's name. It was another kind of no-name center back that they added to the roster instead, whose name is escaping me right now. But that goes down in the history books as one of the more bizarre decisions. And I've heard all sorts of rumors of why it happened, none of which I've ever been able to confirm. But to get rid of a young left back like that you drafted and that was playing really well for you is a shocking decision that has hurt the Revolution for many years.
And it still bothers you.
It bothers me, and I know it bothers other people. I know Julian Cardillo is someone that always mentions that odd decision, but it's just crazy that was something that happened.
One quick note too, just to circle back, the college and the Water Boys, the South Central Louisiana State University Mud Dogs. So I just wanted to let that be known for the record. Another thing too that you mentioned, Nemeth. I thought Rowe was absolutely animated yesterday. You could tell how badly he wanted 3 points in that game, and he clearly wanted to stick it to the Revs. I don't think I've ever seen that much passion out of Kellen Rowe, from his tenure with the Revolution. Certainly not for a few years. So he was all over the place. Him and Carlos Hill were fighting back and forth. He was yelling at the referee. He very clearly was trying to stick it to New England yesterday, and yeah, they certainly seem like they wanted the 3 points. So if there's one little positive we can take away, it's that they didn't get it. So John Trainer asked us, do you think the Revs should stick with the 4-4-2 against Philadelphia? I think it looked good until Bai got sent off.
Yeah, and again, Philadelphia is a different team. I kind of think you have to stick with it because nothing else has been working. I'm not convinced it works. It'll work long term, like I said. Philadelphia, the good news for the Revolution is they have a midweek game, so they should be a bit tired in that one. Philadelphia is a very different team than Sporting Kansas City. Philadelphia's had some struggles this year. They've been good at times, they've been bad at times. I don't know what to expect out of that game, but I think that is you stick with what worked because I'm not sure what other option you have.
Yep. And one more formation question. This actually comes from Facebook. Michael St. John. He made a comment. He said he thinks the answers to the issues with the back line is to go to a 3-5-2 formation. Two defensive midfielders will allow Carlos Gil to push up and play central underneath two forwards. And those midfielders can also help with the three men in the back. The 4-4-2 is too flat. And he also suggests that maybe working out Brandon Bye as a defensive midfielder. He says Caicedo and Caldwell can cover a lot of grounds and do the dirty work. But overall, their skill set is terrible. His words, not mine. So, Sean, what are your thoughts on a 3-5-2? And then what are your thoughts about maybe moving Brandon Bye to the center of the field?
So I'm a big fan of a 3-5-2 formation, and when the Revolution played it back in the mid 2000s, it was phenomenal. I think the Revolution's defenders, their center backs in particular, the shape is too poor. It's a very thin roster on center backs, as we've talked about, and to play a 3-5-2, you're just exacerbating that problem. If you play a 3-5-2, you're kind of wasting Edgar Castillo, unless it's really a 5-3-2, because Edgar Castillo, what does he play in a 3-5-2 unless he's your left winger? And so I'm not really sure that makes a lot of sense. And, I don't think this team at all is constructed for a 3-5-2 formation, and I think it would just exacerbate their defensive problems because the Revolution keep getting beat on the wings and cut inside, and to take away the guys that are defending the wings entirely, and then ask guys like Buchanan and Jones, if you're going to put them as the wingers, to cover that much ground. I just don't think that works with the way the team is currently constructed. And then Brandon Bye as defensive midfielder, I don't see his skill set as fitting that position at all. I don't think he's got the positional awareness to play that role. And I do think that Luis Caicedo, when he's playing well like he was a couple weeks ago, or just last weekend, I should say, a weekend ago, is great at that role. And I think Scott Caldwell is good at that role. And I do think the Revolution can benefit from signing a truly dominant presence to play back there next to the two of them, whichever one is in the lineup. But Brandon Bye in that role, I don't think would work.
Well, and the other thing too about Brandon Bye is I think one of the best things that he can do is, if you put him at right midfield and you get him up the pitch, he can go one-on-one with some players and he can service, some low crosses. Not a lot of crosses have been successful so far, but we saw last year when they did kind of run this 5-3-2 a couple games, I think in May or June. Brandon Bye would push up a little bit on the wing and kind of take on guys one-on-one. If you put him in the middle, I don't know. You kind of lose that aspect of it. So I think I prefer him kind of being a wing guy as opposed to a defensive midfielder type. So I agree with you there. I don't think he'd be necessarily terrible at defensive midfield, but I just think you want him playing along the right side. In terms of the 3-5-2, I think you're right about the roster construction. I'm not totally against a 3-5-2, but I think Andrew Farrell would have to be one of those three. And then, it would be Mancien and De La Mayor or Annie Baba. You're kind of wasting Edgar Castillo. There's really not a whole lot of space for him unless you play him at left mid, which I guess you could, but it brings up more questions than answers with the way the roster is constructed in this current form. So I agree with everything you said there. James Downing did ask us too, and we've already kind of tackled this one. Who can the Revs start in the defense next week? And we kind of covered that one already. I don't know if you have any other thoughts about who you want to put along the back line, but my assumption is it kind of totally depends on, which center backs are available. My guess is Andrew Farrell is staying at center back, and then hopefully one of them is healthy enough, and then we're going to see a similar Luis Caicedo, Edgar Castillo on the outside backs. Anything to add, Sean?
No, I think that's right. I just think if you're in a situation where somehow all of those guys are out, and I think seeing now that somebody had said Manchin had plantar fasciitis, which can keep a guy out for more than 1 week. And certainly with, concussive symptoms or whatever it was that De La Maya had, that's, the one thing that I read that it could have been, if that's more serious, that could certainly keep a guy out more than 1 week. If you're stuck with, trying to fill somebody in at center back, I'd almost rather see Caldwell play back there than Zahibo, just because I think he's positionally more sound. And I think Zahibo, he has the height for it, but I think that could be disastrous. And, maybe you put Caldwell back there, and then you put Caicedo in the midfield, and the real Caldwell was playing, and maybe you put DeJuan Jones at right back to make that work. But if that's the case, and the Revolution can't somehow, miraculously sign a defender midweek, they're in a lot of trouble.
Haven't they said too that Brandon Bai can play center back too? I feel like they've said that Luis Caicedo and Brandon Bai have played center back at certain points too, which I have no interest in seeing either one of those move there. So, yeah, it's a bit shaky. Again,
where's Giles Phillips?
Every week, reportedly Giles Phillips. We never know. Trialists, we didn't know his secret identity. But it brings you back to the question that we've asked multiple times. Why didn't this team re-sign Christian Machado? He could play all along the back line and defensive midfield. It would have provided great depth for the Revolution. I know I've made that joke before. I know I'm stealing my own joke.
Where's Josh Smith these days?
Actually, I looked it up. We'll get there later, but I did look it up. He's playing 4th division soccer in Germany. And Samoya's over in like Nicaragua in the 1st division there. So, yeah. Phil Fleischer asked us, he says, I think Farrell should remain at center back for a while until they get their heads straight. What are your thoughts on that? Let's talk about that first. Andrew Farrell, center back or right back?
Right back, I would say for sure. If they need to fill him in at center back, he has shown at times he can be good at it, and he's shown other times that it's not his best position. I think the Revolution are much better off if Andrew Farrell is at right back. Assuming all their center backs are healthy, even though Delamay and Mancienne and Andy Baba have had their poor moments this season. I'd be more comfortable with the two of them out there and have Andrew Farrell at right back. I don't think Andrew Farrell is a calming presence that fixes their center back problem by moving inside.
Yeah, and I think I don't hate Farrell at center back. I certainly wouldn't prefer it. I think he's a very good emergency center back, but we've seen him at center back too many times. He can fill in the case of injury and suspensions. I'm sure we'll see him there, at least next game. But yeah, he also asks, "What do you think Brad Regret's not putting a single defender on the bench? What was he thinking?" I think now we have a little bit of context that there weren't any defenders other than Gabriel Somi, who will never see the light of day again, available. Sean, I will add kind of a tack onto this question right after I answer it. Let's speculate, baseless speculation. Do you think something happened with Mancienne? There were some people on Twitter that seemed to say that he argued with a fan after the game, and he seemed very upset after the game. Do you think something happened with Mancienne where he wasn't available for this game, or do you think it's a legitimate injury?
I've heard the plantar fasciitis. I think that was what Brad Feldman said during the broadcast. I tend to believe it's probably that. I did hear the thing about him arguing with a fan about not going over and shaking hands or whatever after the game, and that's disappointing. But my guess is that this one really is just an injury. It left the Revs so hamstrung. Although I think. I believe after the game, Brad Friedel said it would have been Delamea starting. So I don't know when this injury took place and why we didn't hear about it till time of the game. But my hunch is that it was actually a legitimate injury, and that that wouldn't have been enough for Friedel to. That one interaction wouldn't have been enough for Friedel to take away one of his center backs in a game where they sorely needed one.
Yep. Phil also says he's cynically dubbed Mancienne Dielna 2.0, which, I don't think he's there just yet in terms of he hasn't been buried in the depth chart. He's still getting starts. But Dielna, another high-priced signing from England who isn't panning out exactly how we had planned. I don't think that comparison is totally baseless. And Dielna also, I don't know if you saw this, Sean, out of the 18 with Portland. So he is second MLS team that he's fallen out of favor with.
Not surprising.
Already. We're not even in May yet. So
why did they sign him is the question. Why would you trade for that guy? What did they see that we didn't see?
I mean, if you kind of expect that there's a falling out with the coach, maybe you kind of take him in as a, reclamation project, or, maybe you think if he can turn his attitude around, maybe there's that potential. But, I don't know. I don't know. I think everyone in New England is just kind of nodding there like, yep. I mean, he certainly, and he has a powerful left leg. We talked about a little bit last year where he had some qualities. He just can't piece it together. And, he is the heart of a striker, as Brian O'Connell said last year. He doesn't really want to play defense. And when you're center back, that's kind of important.
When he played left back, he looked even more disinterested.
Right.
He wanted to attack.
Portland's season also not going that well, so I'd imagine that when he's just on a bad team, he's not putting in 100%. So that's just how it is. Phil Fleischer did ask one more question. Is Bunbury Dunsky, or was this a matchup choice? And we kind of talked about Bunbury being excluded from the starting 11 and being behind Buchanan and Brandon Bye at right midfield. Sean, do you think Bunbury has taken a couple of notches down the depth chart, or do you think this was just a situational thing?
I think he's taken a couple notches down on the depth chart, but he's certainly not in the doghouse. He came off the bench in this one. I think there'll be plenty of opportunities for him going forward to re-earn a spot and play up striker or right mid. But I definitely think he's taken a few notches down the depth chart, and for the reason we talked about earlier, finishing has just been terrible.
Yep. I will add too that I think he is. I wouldn't say he's done. Certainly, JFC has kind of earned a spot up there. I think they want to see what they have in Brian Wright before they send him back down to Birmingham. Although maybe not, considering how few minutes he's getting. But there's a bit of a logjam up there up top. So I think Bunbury is going to be moved into a backup role, and we're going to see him come on, 20, 30 minutes here or there at striker or at right mid. We might not see him in the starting lineup for a while. That is my guess. If I had to say anything, but I think that's just because JFC and Buchanan have had really, really solid games past, really just yesterday. But yeah, I don't think Bunbury's starting for a few games.
I think one terrible game from Juan Aguadelo or Juan Caicedo could see Bunbury back in the lineup, though.
Yeah, but then you also have Pania and Fagundes.
Fair point.
I mean, there's just so many people, and that's where they were playing the last two games. So, I mean, he does shuffle the deck when there are poor performances. So, do I think we'll see him before June? Absolutely. Do I think we'll see him in the next 3 games? Probably not. I think Diego Fagundes and I think Christian Pania get chances before we see Teal Bunbury get a chance, at least up top. If Tayon Buchanan has a terrible game next week, maybe they move Teal Bunbury back. I don't know. But, Joe asks us, is the combination of Enibaba's suspensions, injuries, and Bye's inability to defend at right back when Farrell plays in the middle will it finally make Burns address the need for depth at center back?
You would hope so, but you also, again, we've talked about this before, it was obvious in the offseason there wasn't enough depth there. So I don't know why it's taken this long. There's been several situations this year where the Revolution have had a couple of injuries, and it's shown that their defensive depth and center back in particular is terrible. I don't know what's taking so long, and the window is closing soon, and all the talk that we'd heard about was about a guy that's going to help the attack. So who knows at this point? But at this point, signing a fairly no-name guy from the USL or some guy that's even out of contract that can play center back, finding a guy like a London Woodbury, like when they found him, would be better than nothing.
Yeah, and I think they might address the need for center back on an emergency basis, like you said, but I don't know who they would bring in at this point, long term. I don't know, at least not for a couple of transfer windows. I know Mancien's contract. I think there's a team option at the end of the season, so we might be seeing some new center backs come in, in the off season. But overall, yeah, it was a glaring need coming into this year, and even if they took a center back in the 3rd, 4th round of the draft, kind of like a Nicholas Samoya from last season or a Josh Smith, I think that would have been a more of a positive thing because you at least have some depth. But they chose to not even use a roster spot on a kid out of college. So yeah, I don't know what it'll take to get them to address center back. And we've seen the Dallas game. Now we have next week. We had this week. We had the Atlanta game. It's coming back to bite them, the lack of depth there.
Well, and I'm not aware of anyone in the academy that's a defensive player that's ready to step up to this level either. So I don't think that's going to be the answer, unless somebody's flown under the radar. I'm not aware of anybody in the academy that could fill in. So I don't know where they're going to find somebody, but they need somebody.
Yep. Mike Kennedy asks, are we in a time warp? This is just like Nichols' final season in 2011. There was even a 4-4 draw late in that year. We just couldn't get wins just like this team. Sean, I want to kind of follow up on a question too that we had over the past offseason of whether or not the Revolution as a franchise were at a low point. We kind of identified this as the low point in Revolution history 2011. So I want to get your thoughts on how this team stacks up to that 2011 team, and if we're at a low point or if we're still better comparatively to 2011.
I mean, I think the roster right now is a heck of a lot better comparatively to 2011. That roster was a complete mess. There was, Benny Failhopper was perhaps the best name on the roster, but he didn't seem like he was very interested in playing for that team. I think that roster was much worse. I think you had a much better head coach than Steve Nicol that had proven himself in the past, but was at the end of his tenure, and every coach, I think, has a shelf life, and he was reaching it. But I would be more positive if the Revolution had to change of direction now that the roster at least has pieces going forward than what that roster had. You look at guys on it, and there was some talent there, and Chris Tierney and Matt Rieslow, who was getting older at that point, that could go going forward. But otherwise, it was a lot of guys like Shari Joseph, who was at the end of his rope at that point, and his career was pretty much done. Just looking at that team, I think the Revolution right now have a much better roster.
Do you think they have much better chances in terms of playoff wise? Because right now the Revolution are back in last place in the East.
Yeah, MLS was a lot worse back then too, and saying that the roster was worse. But I don't think this Revolution team right now is going to turn things around. I do have more faith that there's the talent where they could turn things around in that year if they can figure things out. Because like we've talked about before, you see guys like Christian Pena, Diego Fagundes, and how good they've been in the past, and the level that they're not playing at this year. And you have to think maybe there's a way to unlock those guys and get them to work out and get them to work with a guy like Carles Gil, even though we're 10 games into the season now and we haven't seen it. Where you look at that roster in 2011, and I think there was a lot less to have any level of hope about.
Yeah. Moving on to another question. It kind of comes up because Cullen Rowe was drafted by the Revolution in 2012, but Eric Jean asked us, how would you grade the Revs drafting since 2013? I'll run through who the Revolution have drafted, Sean, and then you can give me a letter grade on whether or not you approve or not. Obviously, last year was Buchanan and DeJuan Jones. 2018, branded by Mark Segbers, Nicholas Samoya. 2017, Brian Wright. I don't know his first name because he did not make the team coming out of camp, but kid the midfielder out of Kentucky who didn't make the team. And then there was also Josh Smith. Jordan McCrary in 2016 was the first-round pick, along with Michael Gamble, who I also don't think made the team, and Femi. 2015, there was only one draft pick, Mark Fenelis, who I also don't think made the team. He was drafted in the third round, but they used their other three picks on Teal Bunbury, Brad Knighton, and Jeremy Hall through trades. 2014 was Steve Newman, Patrick Mullins, Eric Sundley, and Pierre Omanga. And then in 2013 was Andrew Farrell, drafted number 1 overall, Donnie Smith, and Luis Suffner. So Sean, after hearing that 7 years worth of draft picks, grade the Revolution and give us an assessment on how well they've done.
I'll say a C. And if you're comparing it to how well they did in the 2000s, you'd rate it a lot worse. But the Super Draft has become more and more relevant. So that the Revolution this year got 2 guys that are contributing and 2 guys that have already started games in the first round is pretty impressive. Some of those past drafts have been a disaster. Jordan McCrary at number 10 was obviously a mistake that didn't work out. You mentioned the drafts where they didn't have a draft pick till the third round. Hard to judge very much based on that. But I give it a C, and most of that's based on the fact that Brandon Baye has been a solid contributor, and DeJuan Jones and Tajon Buchanan has been about as much as you can expect from a first round draft pick in his rookie season at this stage of the MLS Super Draft, where the Super Draft really has lost a lot of relevance. If you're trying to find another Taylor Twellman or a Clint Dempsey or a Pat Noonan, or a Shari Joseph, or those guys the Revolution signed that were franchise players from the draft in 2000s, that just doesn't really happen anymore. And yes, there are shocking examples like Julian Gressel, who's been fantastic for Atlanta, but that's really the exception. And finding guys like that, doesn't really happen anymore. So I say C, and it would be lower if not for the past 2 drafts where the Revolution have at least found serviceable players.
Yeah, I actually am going to go B-. But you hit the nail on the head that a lot of that grade depends on Buchanan, Jones, and Brandon Baye and what they turn out to be. I mean, those are 3 guys that started yesterday. Those might be MLS starters long term. There's a bright future potentially for those guys, but they also might turn out to be complete busts. I'm also not writing off Brian Wright just yet, although I am a little skeptical that he's going to be an MLS starter. He might have a few more years in him kind of as a backup type player. So yeah, I give him a B-. Obviously Jordan McCrary is the big miss. He was the right back drafted at number 10, and he was supposed to come and play right back and shift Andrew Farrell over to center back, but he ended up I believe he had a knee injury. I don't know if it was a torn ACL, but he was out for most of the season. And then the Revolution released him going into 2017, so he didn't even last on the roster more than 1 year. But if you look at the Revolution's last 7 drafts, Andrew Farrell, Patrick Mullins, Teal Bunbury with their first round trade, and then you have Brian Wright, Brendan Bye, and Tayon Buchanan and DeJuan Jones. Every single year they have a guy that's still in the MLS. And so overall, I think that's a fairly good track record considering how year after year, first round draft picks sticking around in the MLS is not necessarily a given anymore. I give them a B minus. I think their gigantic failure is the fact that they're just catching up now with their academy. And I know we've mentioned on the last 2 or 3 podcasts, Miles Robinson opting not to sign with the Revolution Academy and then go to Syracuse and go to the Super Draft. And he was taken number 2 overall. Now he's having a very, very solid season with Atlanta. I think that's where they've fallen short in terms of not keeping up with the MLS, where even though they were, having a standard performance draft wise with the rest of the MLS, I think they've really fallen behind in terms of replenishing their academy, and as a result it's really kind of got them behind the 8 ball in terms of bringing in young talent.
Well, the other negative I'll say as far as their super draft performance is why in all those years have we not seen them draft a center back in the first round when we've talked about how weak of a position that is for the Revolution. And that's actually a position where teams have had some success in the super draft is, finding American center back. It's pretty hard to find a, good attacking player in the super draft these days. And the Revolution maybe did that with Buchanan and Jones. So, great job there. But in all these years, it's a little bit surprising that the Revolution haven't used one of their first-round picks on a center back, and instead have been stuck in a position where they have to bring in extremely overpriced, expensive foreign players that aren't that good.
Yep. The only center backs they have drafted since AJ Soares left were Josh Smith in 2017 and Nicholas Samoya in 2018, and both of those were 4th-round picks. And in case you guys don't know, most teams pass in the 4th round, so not exactly high quality prospects. I don't think there was any news of the week. I will say, Sean, I do want to bring up one quick point. I know we're running a little bit long, but I just want to kind of fuel your theory about maybe potentially this DP has not signed yet with the Revolution, because normally there's no hesitation in naming signings and players know where they're going before a season ends. But Brad Friedel did his interview with 98.5 this week, and he said they're working around the clock to bring in new players from overseas. And that comment struck me kind of weird. And I know he said it before, but I kind of put pieces together because to my knowledge there's only one international spot open, and that has to go to the DP. So what are you working around the clock for?
Unless the DP is a former U.S. international or something that's playing in Europe, I guess that's the only other alternative outlook there. But no, I agree with you, and I think if you're the Revolution and maybe this game is a positive for Brad Friedel, but if you're the Revolution and you're starting to have some doubts that Brad Friedel is the coach for you long term, maybe you're less excited about going out there and spending a lot of money to bring another DP in, and that could be holding up the process as well.
Yep. Is Mancien's injury real, and has the DP actually signed yet? Like, a lot of great baseless speculation from us this week, just promoting conspiracy theories all across the board. Sean, any final thoughts or any shout outs you want to give this week?
Just, shout out to the Revolution for finally playing a match that was, not terribly boring to watch. There's been so many games this year where the Revolution have been shut out that even when it's, not good soccer like this game, I don't think it was good soccer by the Revolution. It was nice to finally see something that was enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, and also, I should mention that Birmingham Legion won their first home game, a 1-0 win over Loudoun United, stoppage time goal. So very exciting for them. Go Revolution South. How did Tottenham do? You want your 15 seconds on Tottenham or no? I know Arsenal lost, so I'm surprised you didn't say that.
Spurs have not been playing particularly well in the league lately, but everyone else around them has been playing even worse. So at this point, I'm just focused on Champions League, and until that game happens, I'm not going to care very much about Spurs not doing particularly well in the league as long as they get top 4, which they're still in good shape for.
I just Googled it and Tottenham lost, so that's why you didn't mention it. I get it now. Also, shout out to Fulham. They beat Cardiff City yesterday. Fulham's already been relegated, but as someone who has a future on Cardiff City being relegated, I very much appreciated them getting the victory yesterday.
Speaking of Fulham, ex-Fulham player Emerson Heinemann made a very rare appearance for Bournemouth this past weekend. So, shout out to the American that has not lived up to the hype, but got a Premier League appearance.
Future Revs designated player, question mark? Baseless
Could you imagine?
speculation all over the place.
He has a guy that plays in central midfield, so he could totally, talk about influencing the offense.
Sean, where can people follow you on Twitter?
You can follow me at Sean L. Donahue, and I usually avoid the baseless speculation on Twitter, but we'll save it for the podcast.
I drag it out of you. You can follow us on Twitter at Revolution Recap, and also like our Revolution Recap page on Facebook. We're going to ask for questions on Facebook going forward. So be aware of that. Not only can you ask questions, but also your parents who are confused at how Twitter works. So I'm really excited about that. Please leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening. Next week, the Revs travel down I-95 for an Easter Conference matchup against the Philadelphia Union. We'll be back with a new episode to break it all down. But until then, thanks everyone for listening, and go Revs.